So let us then proceed. I'm going to take you through the functionality of the Retention Manager software. The software basically helps you develop a retention schedule, helps you manage it, link it to the legal research, keep it up to date over time, and make changes into the future. We also have the capacity to produce reports for review, and we can produce the final retention schedule, as well as we can link our retention data to other electronic document management systems, provided that the vendor of those systems wants to be compatible with us. We can talk more about that as we get into the discussion. So what I'll do is I'll start by showing you some of the functionality. So the easiest way to use Retention Manager is to start with the user record screen. We ship this screen blank. It can be used for putting in an existing retention schedule, for including an inventory of records, a listing of records that was developed by a department, and the goal is to compile that information in one location so we can use it as a tool in developing the retention schedule. So you can make an election of using your existing retention schedule as the final schedule and link retention rules to that and legal research, or using it as a tool to build a new retention schedule. And I'll show you how we do that. So just as an example, I'm going to add a new record into the system. And if you travel, you produce employee expense reports. You probably have some other nomenclature for that. But basically, it's a report that will document your travel expenses, as well as you'll use it as a vehicle for providing receipts to the accounting department. So when we enter it in, there is no retention period shown. The fastest way of using Retention Manager is to link your record titles or your old retention schedule to one of the record series that has already been defined. And then, of course, you can expand the definition of record series by adding additional ones that you deem necessary for your organization. In this particular case, we already have defined a record series called Employee Expense Reports. It has a code, subject, in a hierarchy, a description, and it's linked to a rule of retention, which we'll look at in just a few minutes. But there is already predefined a retention period. For those record series that we deliver as the default data within Retention Manager, we'll take care of setting up everything and linking it to the legal research and developing the retention period. Once you have this information, though, you're free to add additional information or modify what we've given you based upon your particular needs. To link this record series to the item we found in our inventory or previous retention schedule, I just double-clicked on it, and notice now the standard record series employee expense reports with its 6-year retention is linked. We also include a second retention, which we refer to as the unofficial retention, because the accounting group in your organization will be responsible for managing the records for the full audit period until those records are no longer needed, while individuals will just have copies of the records from that point forward, and we don't believe they should be kept for long periods of time. The official version is in one department. The copies should be kept no more than a maximum of 1 year. That means no more than 1 year. If the user wants to throw it away in a week, a month, they're free to do that, but they can't keep it longer than 1 year. So that's one example. Let me just throw in one other example, and it'll be pretty generic. You have contracts with various individuals, various groups to provide you products and services. Contracts are a real generic concept, but if it showed up in an inventory, for example, you would expect it would be like written contracts, like purchase orders, things like that, that you understand to be contracts. We double-click on it to see if we have a record series. Clearly nothing on the first page shows up, so we would use our Find tool. The Find tool will allow us to put in words or phrases, and we're just going to put in contracts, so it'll find contracts or contracting or other phrases like that. First one we come to is contract accounting records, has the word contract, but not what you think of when you just see a phrase in an inventory called contracts. Next one is financing external loans and credits, loan document agreements. You may not have many of those in your organization. Labor union contracts, if they exist. And then we get to the generic area called contracts and agreements. Contracts and agreements is in the legal business function. Although it's legal, it's not the legal department. Departments reorganize periodically, business functions stay the same, and of course even in government you have business functions within your organization. Notice the retention period is different. Active plus 6. This is an event type retention. We have a whole elaborate function within Retention Manager to manage the abbreviations and the meaning of all of this. So when we pass a rule of retention such as Active plus 6 to an electronic document management system that will apply the retention, it understands fully what is meant by that and what to do about that. And then the unofficial retention is max act. How long do you need a copy of a contract? For the period of time it's in effect, but certainly up to that period of time, but no longer. So I make the link between the two. I've now added 2 records, and with their various retention periods, I can now go and add many others. Eventually, I'll find records in your organization for which there are no matches, and that's when we get into customizing Retention Manager. I'm going to open up the standard record series again, and just to show you what information we already have. Let me close these down. These are the business functions we predefine. As I said, some of them may be useful to you, some may not be. Some may have no relevance. For example, tax to a government organization. You will want to build probably an audit area, which we normally include under finance, and you probably don't need tax or treasury for what you're doing. But accounting, administration, everybody has some general environment in the workplace. Finance is more the banking side of the world as opposed to accounting, which is getting the numbers in the right accounts, human resources, legal, etc. As I said, you can then go ahead and create your own record series that meet your needs from that point forward. Each of these record series is linked to a rule of retention. So I'm going to step you through so you can see what the rules look like. The rules are very, very broad descriptions of records. Record series are more granular. They're the interface with the user. They help provide enough description that a user can find what record series links to the record that they have in their possession. Retention rules are much broader. So for example, we have a record retention rule called accounts payable, accounts receivable. It's everything that pretty much you have in the accounting area. You can separate out payroll, you can separate out journals and ledgers and reports, but for the most part, it handles all the accounting functions. Yet in record series, you could be more granular if you wanted to. So you could have accounts payable, you could have invoices if you want, you could have vouchers, whatever your vocabulary might be. that you'll be able to utilize the types of records that users could understand and link their particular documents to. Each of our retention rules is the last place where retention is determined. For legal purposes, it's linked to a legal group for which we get the legal period. The legal group can best be understood when we get into that function. Basically, we are going to put together a large amount of legal research, and then we're going to group like laws together. Those laws dealing with the accounting area we put together, those dealing with human resources, those dealing with various issues that are covered by the laws will be put together. And then within each of those legal groups, we could subdivide the information as well as apply retention. So the legal is coming from a different place where it's uniquely determined. At this point, we can add a user period, and the longer of those two periods is the total retention. And here's where we would also put in the unofficial retention. The user period is a subjective period that you determine based upon how people use the records. That's been my experience. I never ask users of records how long they need the records to do their job, because they will generally give me the wrong answer, because part of their answer includes what the legal requirement may be. For user purposes, we just want to know how long the user needs the record to do their job. So for example, I'm on accounts payable right now. If an accounts payable clerk has a record of bills that they've paid, how long do they need it to do their job? They'll tell you, 3 years till we complete the audit, or whatever the period might be. In the private sector, they'll say for the period of time IRS could audit us. The reality is, once that bill's been paid and a month or two goes by and the person who receives payment does not complain about it, nor in the statement of payments complains that they did not receive the payment, you probably don't need the record for user purposes, but you'll still need it for legal purposes. There could be a dispute later on. You'll need it for audit, etc. Where is this legal period coming from? It comes from the legal groups. So I'm going to now open up the legal groups in question. We just create legal groups as we need them. As I said, we take all our legal research, we sort it out into various groups, and then for each group we assign a label, which is a code, some subjects, a description of the legal group, and then we're going to look at the nature of the legal research. So what I'm going to do now is show you what legal research has been put into this group, and then you'll have a much better idea, I hope, of how this works. So here is all the legal research that was put into this legal group. The longest legal requirement period, where the law states a specific requirement, was 6. There are other laws that say 5. You obviously, have not interested in all the jurisdictions within the United States, but that's what I'm showing in the demonstration. Once you click on one of these laws, you then get to see the legal research, how it was indexed. So we track information by an LRBR code, which is an internal code we use to keep track of citations. There's a 3-character suffix that allows us to index laws by up to 1,000 different ways. There are situations where a law, section of law, could have multiple paragraphs that have different provisions. We include the actual citation, the jurisdiction, the headers from the law, the source, industry and subject becomes important. I'll explain it just a minute. And the legal period, our interpretation of what the laws mean. You may add additional laws to the database. They could be regulations, they could be local provisions, whatever else you want to add besides what's included in the database. Then we include the full text of the law, which is fully searchable. And you can read it, you can print it, and do what you need to do with it. The grouping technique ensures that related laws are all kind of grouped together because there are generally more than one law that affects records. It's rare that it occurs that one law affects one record. It's normally many laws affect many records. So that's legal requirements, and then we match in our legal group our selected legal requirements period to the longest legal requirements period in the legal research. In fact, we have a tool that will help you do that to make sure that mathematically you have selected the longest legal requirements period based upon the research that was put together. Besides legal requirements, there are also legal considerations. Legal considerations are other laws which are not requirements. So the other laws could be statute of limitations, for example, period of time you can sue or be sued. Or one area that's very popular in many jurisdictions are, I'm just cycling down here, I don't know if I can find a Minnesota provision, is that we don't have it in this grouping. That basically these are laws that will deal with areas that are of interest in making the retention decision but are not requirements. So laws that were MAINT, which we indexed using MAINT, are laws that say you shall maintain records but do not state a retention period. Years ago, some attorneys thought that meant that if you're required to keep the records, and there's no permission to destroy it, you could never destroy it. We've proven that that's not true. There are 8 states in the United States that basically say if the law of the state requires you to keep records and the law does not state how long, you can safely destroy them after 3 years. And this is also true for federal regulation for a different reason. So there are ways of interpreting these things, but the biggest area is statutes of limitation, and that is under our legal group for contracts. It's about every state will have some statute of limitations related to contracts, and there are variations. Minnesota, my first Minnesota, for damages based on services for construction to real property. And I'm sure there's one a little bit less period for general contracts, but I would have to look it up for you. And each of these statute of limitations or limitation of action would be the period of time you can sue or be sued, and you therefore might want to consider keeping the records for that period of time. It's not legally required, but you can make a legal decision that you're going to follow the statute of limitations, or you can make the legal decision that says, you know, we really never get involved in this litigation related to contracts. If we have a dispute, we bring it up to the other party, or they bring it up to us, and if it does go to arbitration or to litigation, we deal with it right away. Within a year or two, we start the matter and get it resolved. Therefore, there's no need to keep the records for 10 years or the full period of statute of limitations, because your history shows that the matters will be raised in a much sooner time period. So that's how our legal groups work. In a second, I'll show you then how we get information together to form the legal groups and the reports. and that's most of the functionality that we're going to find in Retention Manager. I'll pause again for questions. We have a tool here called the Legal Search tool. Every time there's an update, we have to update our search indexes. And you can look for individual words, or phrases. I'll just look for the word employment, but we could have put a Boolean asterisk at the end and look for different suffixes. So that totally within the database there were 651 laws that were identified. Why are there more total index entries? Because some of the laws have 2 or more index entries based upon the content of the law or the number of paragraphs with different retention. Then you can view the results of that. And so we'll give you all the citations, and we'll give you the text and the information, and you can read it. We'll highlight where the word hit was, and this is a very sophisticated search engine because we have a huge legal research database, and you're going to want to use it in a very finite way. Even though it's a wonderful tool and it can help you find laws within our legal research database, and as I said, if you have additional provisions, standards you follow, etc., that you would like to add to the database, you can do that, and it'll be searchable and usable just like every other law in the system. The way we prefer, though, that our clients organize the legal research is through a function called Profile. On the left, it shows all the industries in which we have done legal research. On the right, we have identified the industries, and when you click on something, the subjects that we have deemed relevant for the default data that we ship with Retention Manager. If you find that you have other provisions that are of interest to you that is not in the default data, you would then highlight it and move it to the right side of the screen. When the profile function is then closed, it will go into the legal research database, find all the laws that match these industries and subjects, and decide that they are relevant for your particular project. But in addition to that, you can see it in the default data, each of the industries and subjects that we've already selected as part of the default data has been placed already into one or more legal groups. So once this profile is closed, it not just finds the relevant laws, but then sorts them out into legal groups like I showed you with legal group index and legal research. When there is an update to the legal research, the same rules of the profile apply, but it applies to an updated legal research database. And therefore, there could be other laws that are found. If in the update some laws were deleted, they're no longer relevant for your project, and therefore changes could occur in the legal research. I'm now going to close this, and you'll see how quickly we do legal research based upon this rules-based approach of going into the legal research and pulling out relevant data. As I said, we have set it up for the default information. That's why it is useful to use as much of it as you can. And when you then customize it for your purposes, you will need to set up the profile in the way we train you on, or follow examples of how we did it for the default data. So we updated internally Besides myself, we have Brett Andreski on our team. Brett is a full-time licensed attorney, and he works on a regular basis updating federal and state law. We issue updates 3 times a year. That has been more than enough for client use, and you should run the latest update before destroying records. Most of our clients will do destruction 1 time per year, but others want to check if the retention has changed more often. So what happens when there's an update? It's loaded onto a workstation where you previously installed Retention Manager. It will then detect that there is an installation of Retention Manager and confirm that your subscription is current, that you're entitled to do the update. It will then put data into a particular directory, which is now a candidate for updating. And then the next time you open up Retention Manager, that there'll be a flag set that then updates the legal research. So the legal research is found over here. I'm going to just open up our section on Minnesota, for example. Here's all the laws we have. Here would be, again, the indexed information and the text. If there is an update to this particular law, it will have changed later than the last change, and we have a way of tracking it by our data versions, the text versions, our data version, and this is for our internal administrative purposes, tracks the last time the index was changed in which version, and the text version is the last time the text of the law may have changed. And there are various reasons why the two of these may not be exactly the same number. So what happens is the existing law is then marked as superseded in the legal research database, and the new law is then marked as being the active version of the law. So the next time you run Profile, like I showed you, and regenerate the legal research, you'll be using the current versions of the law. So what happens then in the legal group is, as I said, we will then show you the legal research and the legal group, and after you have run then the update, there's a tool that we have which is check legal requirements period from the beginning. The system then will run through the legal requirements periods against what was the legal requirements period selected for this legal group, and stop when there's an inconsistency. So just to show you what it's like, so once you have the two side by side, what I wanted to do is I wanted to make a change, like you had, let's say you put 7 years as your legal requirements period. Now looking at the legal research, the longest period is 6 years. So there's a discrepancy between the two. Of course, you can see it visually, but our tool to check the legal requirements period from the beginning will show that there is a discrepancy on this legal group. So the possible value is 6. Legal requirements numerical period does not match legal research. Do you want to edit the retention period? Yes, it'll give you the simple edit screen with an easy way of just putting in that new number, and then you'll save it and it'll replace what you had. Here's another one. This was set up for a corporation, that the 5 is different than the 6, and therefore there will be discrepancies for you to then examine. The same thing can be viewed visually within reports, but this is the tool for the manager, retention manager, to get this correct. Now, the ideal way in which this works, though, is Once you have set up the retention schedule, you'll send it out for review. Different parts of your organization will review the record series, the retention periods, and how it's set up. And then you go through a task where you will authorize or approve the data. So I'm going to authorize all my legal groups. Okay, so it authorized everything for me. What happened when I did this, this is after approval, and it authorizes the retention rules, it authorizes the record series. The colors changed. This all used to be red. Red was our development color, our proposed color. Black is our approved or authorized color. Notice also the retention period moved from the proposed side to the authorized side. So once you have it approved, you then can produce a retention schedule, make it available to your organization, you use it for a year or so, and then there's some updates to the legal research, and you determine that there should be a change. So you go through the change, you can use the tool as I described it, or else possibly somebody in your organization says, well, you know, I've heard you keep accounting records for 7 years, so they make sure you make that change. And now you have two statuses of the retention period. One which has been authorized or approved for use, and the other is a new proposed change. All our reports will show both periods, and all the record series, and I'll just jump straight to the record series, will show you that there is a possibility of two proposed values. You've already authorized 6, but we could have a 6 if you reject the change, and you could have a 7 if you accept the change. So you now have a living, growing set of retention periods that will allow you then to propose changes and see what you previously had. Once you send out the reports and everybody's reviewed it, you authorize it again, and now you have a new authorized retention schedule with authorized data, and then over the next year you'll go through the process again. This also works if you make a change in the text. So in your particular case, you probably don't want to include tax, so you'll edit out the word tax and just leave accounting general. We'll save that. There's a spell check just to double check it. And then notice we've made a change in this subject 1 from accounting tax to accounting. And that change also in the text will show up in the reports. And once you review it, you can either accept those changes or modify it or reject them. And then once that's completed, you can produce a whole new set of reports. In our legal research, we're going to have, for example, the provisions from U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And so those provisions could be brought into the project. It's not by default, because a generic organization doesn't necessarily have the health care issues that you have. But we do have all the regulations related to health care and basically controlled substances, pharmaceutical issues, pharmacy issues, etc. This is our legal research database. At any time, if you wanted to look at the types of laws in that area, you could have used the search engine, but you also can use Profile and view all the legal research that's in the database and identify those laws that are relevant for your organization. And so in this particular case, it's all these subjects. This view shows everything in the healthcare area. If I just click on healthcare providers for healthcare cooperatives. There's a law from Colorado that was indexed that way. And as I said, we can filter the laws so you'd only see Minnesota and U.S. federal. Then you'd have to put together the healthcare laws into a healthcare legal group. Normally, the way we recommend that it be done is that, in your case, all of the healthcare laws, let's say you assume it's all relevant, and you bring it from the left-hand side of the screen to the right-hand side of the screen. And as you can see, we also have indexed the Affordable Care Act, which is the new healthcare law, and its records retention provisions. Then what I would normally do is take all those provisions and put it into its own little legal group. We don't have one for healthcare. We will create one, and we'll call it HC for healthcare. Basically, what I'm doing is putting a label on all these laws. It's like sorting them onto index cards, and then putting a pile of laws together for healthcare, and then putting a label on top of it. I now will assign the label healthcare to each one of these items. Close profile. I know I'm going quickly. But I want to show you the result is now we've created a new legal group for healthcare. Here is all our legal research for all the laws that we found. And now you would have the opportunity to go through that and determine, are these all relevant? Do they cover different areas? So maybe we want to break it up into different components. I can't tell you what those should be without reading the laws. And you could find 5 different legal groups or 3 different legal groups. And we have the tools to break apart now this legal group, put some subjects into one legal group, other subjects into another legal group, and we can start building up then the healthcare area. Well, once we have that worked out, we will then want to add on retention rules, record series to match all of that, and then, of course, get it reviewed and make sure that corresponds to what your organization needs. What is the scope of our legal research? And the scope of our legal research would be all the statutes and regulations on the federal level and all the general business requirements on the state level. So, for example, specific healthcare provisions in Minnesota would not be included in the database. We can add those, or you can add them. Okay, and one last thing I wanted to show you is our reports. So now we can prepare reports showing all the things that we've worked on. Sorry, hit the wrong thing. So we can view, for example, the legal group index with legal research. And we first pick a printer. You can use a PDF printer to produce PDF reports. And what it does is it takes all the information, puts it together. Remember, I had shown you changes that we made in the retention period. I'd added the 7-year proposed legal considerations. There's a note on the bottom of the screen that basically says the bold numbers are proposed. The other ones are authorized. You can see that there have been changes there. There have also been changes in the text here. Here we have accounting tax. We're proposing just accounting. And then here's all the legal research like we saw in the previous view. So you can match it up with the legal requirements period and determine whether your retention period is relevant or not and correct. So we can show the record series, we can show the retention rules, we can produce a report that shows all the citations that were deemed irrelevant for the project, and there are variations of the reports that are also available. At the end of the day, we can come up with a shortened version of the record series report, which could become your records retention schedule. And that's basically the way Retention Manager works. It's a tool for organizing the record series, linking it to any inventory of records or previous retention schedule you had, linking it to the legal research. There's no other known consistent methodology of how you do this, and then bringing it up to date in the future. Let's say you decided to do all the legal research yourself, and you elected not to use Retention Manager. You compile all that legal research. You'd probably have to come up with some manual scheme to do what I showed you, of linking like laws together and creating something like legal groups and relating it to records of the organization. And you'll come up with a retention period, which you will do manually just by visualizing what's the longest requirements. So you could make a mistake doing that. Next year, when it came time to update the retention schedule, you would have to do all the legal research all over again, because you have to check every citation to make sure it hasn't changed, and you have to make sure it hasn't been deleted. You also want to look in the area of law that maybe there's been some additions that you have not yet considered. So without a tool such as Retention Manager, you're really left to your own resources, and from a legal research standpoint, it would require you to do the work all over again each year to verify that the retention is still up to date. So that's basically Retention Manager and how it works. We've been demoing on Retention Manager 3. We're going to be introducing Retention Manager 4 shortly. We're going to roll it out at the ARMA show in Las Vegas the end of October, and then release it to our customers in January. Typical end user is a records manager, somebody hopefully who has had a little experience with retention work in the past, is working with the records, gets trained in the software. Anybody then who has changes to the retention schedule, there'd be a procedure that you establish, and then that one person or a very small number of people working together would then make the entries and make the changes. Then the retention schedule would be produced in a couple different ways depending on how you distribute it. The most common way still is to produce a PDF version of the retention schedule and distribute it in the organization. We also can export our retention decisions. You could pick it up as a spreadsheet, or you can pass it on to and make it available if there's any electronic tools that you have available for managing your records, electronic records or paper records. That data perhaps could be imported directly. If not, it could be manually inserted in some type of retention module in that product. We follow a very standard format, and we have documentation on that format of how that data is made available. So I don't expect, and it just doesn't happen, is that end users are a user of this product. They're not going to go through the training. They're not going to be expert. It's going to be a one person or a very small group who does all the entry and the management of the data for everybody else. Well, Retention Manager 3 is Paradox. Retention Manager 4 is SQL. That's obviously why we're making it, a good reason why we're making the change to Retention Manager 4. We're also reprogramming the entire product with other goals in mind for future expansion. The initial release will function identical to what you saw, but it will have all sorts of additional capabilities that we plan to be adding on over the next year or more.